welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. This is your first time tuning into the show. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. Dan Wolkenstein. The Chargers have returned to OTAs this week. Some new things that we've seen out on the field. Some new faces, new places, new drills, new comments from the podium that I got to tell you, normally I don't toot the horn that much on this show in terms of timing, but our defensive line episode early this week probably couldn't have been better timing because we have comments from Tuli Tuipulotu, from Bud Dupree, from defensive line coach Mike Elston. A lot of things to break down as the Chargers get back to OTAs this week. Before we get into everything, obviously, Dan Wolkenstein, sir, how are you?
I am good. I'm happy that we have approached the end of the week. It's been a long week, a short one, but a long one, but lots of stuff that we've gone through. Good episode today. Lots of takeaways. You mentioned a lot of them from the podium. Hayden Hurst apparently has been impressing as of late. Had a great day at OTA day one this week. Asante Samuel Jr. continues doing Asante Samuel Jr. things. A lot of offensive line tweaking in terms of position flexibility and where people are lining up. You're seeing a lot of names, a lot of new faces. Quentin Johnson had some good and some bad, and all of that and more will be discussed here. Jake, before we get to any of that, I will ask, how are you doing? And then I'll ask you to pay the bills.
Like you, sir, I am happy that we are nearing the weekend. It's been a busy one with a lot of things that have been going on, obviously, with the pod and outside the pod for me this week, but happy to get to the weekend. We're almost there.
Yes, we're almost there. We're so close to being able to have more of the Brown stuff. Travelers, take us to a different place, maybe?
Definitely. Whew. There will be, if that is being consumed once again, I will be traveling many, many places this weekend. No question about it.
Jake is the modern day Loki.
Yes. Although I have not seen the TVA or the multiverse yet, but perhaps they are in my future.
All right, well, now in the immediate future, let's pay the bills. Let's talk about our friends.
I want to remind everybody that BetOnline remains your number one source for all of your summer sports this season, from baseball, golf, NBA, and NHL playoffs. All the latest stats, news, and scores available for you to follow for all of your favorite teams. Get in on the latest odds and lines, including the latest team matchups, player props, and odds for just about every sport that is out there. Head on over to the website today. That's betonline.ag, or use your mobile device to get into the action. Use the promo code Unleashed. Going over to BetOnline, let them know that Chargers Unleashed sent you. BetOnline, where the game starts.
So, OTAs this week, Jake. Some interesting and some fun takeaways. We saw some highlight performances and plays on social media. Ladd McConkey is not out there. Junior Colson is off to the side as well. For the most part, attendance is near 100%. I believe there are 5 players that were not there for whatever reason we don't know yet. But key takeaways: Asante Samuel Jr. still doing what Asante Samuel Jr. does. The guy's ball production has always been incredible. That is not the thing that has been bothering or been a concern for Chargers fans. And that has been something that he's been doing again with another interception here during OTAs. Quentin Johnson as well. He has a lot of Chargers fans on both sides of the aisle, so to speak, in terms of hopeful or pessimistic. Had some good plays. I think had a pretty key drop that he probably should have had, according to Daniel Popper. Lots of kind of takeaways here, but all of it, I think, comes under the backdrop of the man here, for folks viewing on the left, Jim Harbaugh, has his own Harbaugh way of doing things. And Jake, you saw him on the sleds. You saw him doing these gnarly drills with these crazy big circular things. I don't know what they were. Jim Harbaugh continues to do things different at OTAs.
Yeah, this just seems now like a pattern that we have seen since the rookie started to arrive. Just little things, little changes that you see throughout this. And I really can't wait to see what this all looks like by the time that we hit training camp, once this fully gets underway. But Jim Harbaugh out there again with a very unique drill that has basically had 2 tarps up. He's in the middle, basically directing traffic, explained to the quarterbacks that you're going to have receivers coming from both sides, but you don't know which one is going to be coming from behind the tarp. So it was built to hone a quarterback's anticipation and get that type of blind spot timing, even with receivers, where it's like you're coming behind the tarp and there's going to be the ball right there. So it's just these little things that Jim Harbaugh is doing again with the camp, and it's good seeing different drills. It's always nice seeing his change in approach that he is taking with this team along collectively with the rest of the coaches that are out there. Obviously filtering in still more of those 11 on 11 drills. And from what we've heard just through people that we've talked to in the organization, different types of ways that they go through the stretching organization with special teams drills that are out there and different ways that they're approaching that. Obviously, Ben Herbert is very active in the practices that are taking place. We know that in one way or another. So here it is, the Jim Harbaugh stamp that continues to be on the early days of Chargers OTAs.
Yeah, and you mentioned special teams. That is something that a lot of folks are very curious about, how the NFL teams in general, but how this Chargers team is going to handle it, because it is very new. You'll see a lot more production, and Troy Dye, who we'll talk about here in a bit at the podium, talked about how he fully expects there to be a lot more explosive plays, probably both positive and negative for special teams, simply because it is so new to the NFL. You saw Darius Davis out there doing Darius Davis things. Tuli Tuipulotu was talking about, I thought this was funny, during the drills for special teams. He was talking at the podium about, him being out there and it's new, and you don't realize like how fast and how quick some of these players are. And he said, he's out there doing his thing and he makes like 2 steps. I'm paraphrasing, but he does like 2 steps. And before he can even try to make a play, Darius Davis is already like back behind him, score for a touchdown, which you can see here in the image. Darius Davis cruising, which again, one of the reasons why Chargers fans were so excited with Darius Davis was because how electric he is with the ball in his hands. Just get him the ball and good things tend to happen. We saw that last year, and it seems like we're going to start seeing that again this year. And Ryan Ficken, we talked about how important he was to the success of this team, especially special teams. A lot of the players have talked about how much he has done to bring in plays from the XFL and kind of get these guys ready and amped up. And it looks like it is a very big focus for this team to improve the special teams. Improve upon what is already a pretty good special teams, I should say.
Yeah, and as Daniel Popper alluded to in his piece, observation on the special team side, Scott Matlock was getting involved in both the kickoff and return drills. And he had talked about, especially with these new kickoff rules that the NFL has for their procedures, that Ryan Ficken went with a smaller group for the kickoff return duties. He had mentioned that there were 4 defensive backs, 1 receiver, 3 linebackers, and an edge rusher. And I think it's important to note, even though I know we're in early days of OTAs here, but special teams is usually the best shot that you have for a lot of these roster spots that are up for grabs. So now you have a new procedure in place on kickoff duties. How is that going to change overall for basically everybody having to adapt to these new rules? And is that going to be something that weeds out competition? Again, it's the little things, and it's one drill that we're talking about here, but here's yet another thing that you're going to have to keep an eye out on for especially the rookies and the undrafted guys when it comes to making the final 53.
Yeah, another key observation, Daniel Popper kind of talked about this a bunch too, but Hayden Hurst had quite the day and is making an impression. And you heard the tight ends coach earlier in the offseason talking about how he has an opportunity to really become an elite tight end for this team. And that's what they believe him to be. And 6 out of the 7 catches, again, 7 catches he made in this one OTA, 6 of them came from Justin Herbert, according to Daniel Popper, including a full extension diving catch on a crossing route in the final 11-on-11 period. And at one point, he caught a corner route, got an explosive reception between 2 defenders, then proceeded to stand up and launch the ball into the air. Clearly, he had himself a day. And Jake, I think the part that is exciting is this was a position that Chargers fans were really hoping that this team would improve upon last year in the draft. Didn't happen. This year, it was kind of few and far between the options that there were in the draft. They went out and get Will Dissly and Hayden Hurst and kind of this tight end by committee thing. To see Hayden Hurst be that explosive playmaking type tight end, that would answer a huge outstanding question about this Chargers offense. If they can get that and have a blocking tight end like Will Dissly, that is a recipe for success, regardless of what happens with the guys like Stone Smart or Donald Parham Jr. Hayden Hurst being a bona fide superstar, or at least an alpha athletic weapon, huge for this Chargers team.
Yeah, outside of Donald Parham, the only thing that we've really talked about as far as the tight end position goes since the offseason started and since free agency kicked off has basically been, okay, so the Chargers have gone to get those blocking tight ends now to shore up that issue that's plagued them for years. And so now, ever since rookie camp and OTAs have kicked off, really the one player that you've been focusing on, the one that's been alluded to as far as being Justin Herbert's early favorite target, should be no surprise to many, has been Ladd McConkey. So for Hayden Hurst to have then a day like this and to start building that rapport with Justin Herbert at this point of the season, again, I think we start forgetting how valuable that tight end room, with everything that we have talked about with the wide receiver competition that is going to go on, from everything that we have talked about from the running backs that's going to be going on. You don't think about this tight end group that much as far as being a dynamic pass catching option for Justin Herbert. It's just, they're going to basically just do their job. Yes, they're going to catch some passes. Yes, they're going to block, but how are they ultimately going to be deployed? And Hayden Hurst, who has had previously good seasons under Gray Roman once upon a time in Baltimore, he could be a very featured weapon. And I think that it's good signs on early days of this time of the year that you're seeing this type of rapport build up between Hayden Hurst and Justin Herbert. So you take it as a good sign. Some good tight end news to talk about at this time of the year.
Yeah, and another key takeaway that came out of this OTA this week was how many different rotations there were at the offensive line position. And I think this is a good thing for Chargers fans. Again, like, we're still early and there's still a lot to be finalized. I think the right side is probably where the most question marks are in terms of probably the right guard specifically. I think we all would probably assume that the right tackle is going to be Joe Alt. But you saw there was a bunch of different rotations for the offensive line. Jake, what do you make of that?
This is Jim Harbaugh once again doing exactly what he said he was going to do. I mean, we've heard this message really since the days of Mike McCoy talking about getting the best 5 offensive line out there. And I believe that Anthony Lynn had that same goal, and I believe that Brandon Staley had that same goal. But you just feel like with this combination now, and especially with everything that we had talked about with Trey Pipkins leading up to the draft, now you have rotations of Trey Pipkins kicking into guard, which those rumors started circulating around draft time. Obviously, your number 5 overall pick in Joe Alt, you're rotating in between first and second string at the right tackle spot. You're mixing in Jamari Sawyer in this as well. Obviously, Bradley Bozeman, you go out and you sign Alex Leatherwood, which who knows what that's going to end up turning out to be. But to me, it's the message of competition breeding competition. And especially for when your number one priority that has been messaged by your head coach has been to protect number 10, what's the best combination that can do that? So I love this from a variety of different reasons. It's getting guys more versatile, because what if someone happens to go down with that dreaded word that we don't like to talk about on this show anymore? So you can have some guys that are versatile enough to stick in a pinch and maybe not have such a big drop off between a first string guy and a second string guy. Jamari Sawyer, who's also been being utilized at guard and tackle, you're building up his versatility in this offensive line scheme. Trey Pipkins, the same. Joe Alt, you're obviously having him rotate between first and second string again. So I like the different offensive line combinations, not just from the standpoint of finding the best 5, but at the end of the day, you're just going to make these guys more versatile.
Yeah, and a name to look out for, and Daniel Popper brought his name up, undrafted free agent Carson Barnhart, who was with Michigan, has not cracked the OT, is not cracked first team reps, but has been the second team guard, and is a name to watch as a possible player that can maybe slip into that top 6 or 7 guy for depth pieces. And you mentioned Alex Leatherwood, and I know Chargers fans, it's ironic, because how often have we sat here and absolutely flamed the Las Vegas Chargers, and how many times they pluck Chargers into their team, and they take our leftovers, all that jazz. But this is the opposite way. And Leatherwood, I mean, he got absolutely roasted. I think it was his rookie year going against the Chargers.
Bosa had a day.
and has just not been good. And I don't think anyone can argue otherwise that he has been a bust and a disappointment as a former first-round pick. That being said, he is a former first-round pick with a ton of talent and traits, and there's a reason why he was picked there, as well as has won awards as I believe like the best lineman in the country his senior year. I think I heard Matt Money Smith mention that. And he has flexibility. He's played both tackle and guard. Again, it's been a minute since he's played. I think it was 2 years ago since he's had playing time. But going from the Raiders to Chicago, are my expectations that high here? No, not at all. But if he could turn into a depth piece that can bring physicality in the run game and can bring some flexibility as a tackle, guard, swing, hopefully guard more than not, sign me up. You mentioned it. Just bring in more competition. And I think that rises the level of competition. And you can say that same thing about so many different positions. You can say that about the running backs. You can say that about the tight ends. You can say that about the linebackers, the corners. You can say it about the edge group. You can say it about the tackles now with the competition there, the wide receivers, which I think you can make an argument that 3 or 4 guys can try to make an argument for wide receiver 1 here. It's bringing in guys to rise the level of play, I think, is good. And the Chargers are able to do a lot of these kind of buy low signings. And is it smart to rely on all of them to hit? Probably not. But I don't necessarily know if they are going to rely on that. Like this is like an insurance policy for the insurance policy type signing, in my opinion. Do you see anything there that screams maybe some red flags for Alex Leatherwood, or is there really any risk to this?
I mean, I think this is low risk, high reward at the very least. Obviously, Alex Leatherwood, since he has been in the NFL, it hasn't been pretty for him. And to go from essentially 3 teams in a very short period of time that he's been in the NFL, it's not the best foot that you want to start off on, especially if you're an offensive lineman. But Dan, the way that I perceive this, and again, who knows what's going to come of the Alex Leatherwood signing? He may not even make it through camp. Or if things go well, like you mentioned, he could be a key depth piece. This, to me, is another Joe Ortiz special. And this is something that I think that is just severely going under the radar in some circles in terms of other competitive teams do this. He did this. He was part of a organization that did this with the Baltimore Ravens. You've seen the Patriots do this for many, many years back when Belichick was running that squad. Kansas City Chiefs do this very, very well when it comes to low-level signings that, and here's the difference, Dan. We go back to how much weight we're putting in from a coaching perspective that's going to be the X factor. You look at J.K. Dobbins, you look at Christian Fulton, you look at this Alex Leatherwood signing, you look at Bradley Bozeman. Hell, Christian even look Fulton. At like the Denzel Perrimans. Yeah. It's these 1-year potential deals that if they're coached right, it could possibly be turned into a reclamation project.
Or comp pick.
All that's doing at the end of the day is it's breeding competition. It's making your depth on your roster better. And ultimately, that's going to make the Chargers team better. So it's no guarantees for Alex Leatherwood by any means.
But this even makes the team, to be honest.
Right. But this is a very low risk, potential nice reward if it ends up panning out. Even if we're not even talking about the potential of Alex Leatherwood being a starter here.
No.
But just from the possibility to say what is the jump in play that he could possibly get from this coaching group, from learning under Jim Harbaugh, from learning under Greg Roman and the rest of this offensive line group. If he could elevate his play here in the next 2 months, just to even make it as a depth piece, I think it's saying something. So nobody should have the highest expectations for Alex Leatherwood as it currently stands right now. But if we're to get to the end of August and there's been enough of a visual turnaround from what you've seen, depending on where they're going to come in and start playing him and plugging him in, and I would assume that they would rotate him at multiple positions, you look at that and you're like, hey, that was a savvy move.
Yeah. A savvy move to me, a success for this is him making the team, to be honest. If he makes a team, it was a success. I am not expecting him to start. I'm not expecting him to have any formidable playing time other than maybe in break glass in case of emergency, or maybe on a few run physical heavy sets. Like that's what this is. This is not competition for Pipkins or Sawyer here at right guard. It's just, I could be wrong. Nor do I think it's competition for tackle 2. I just, that's not what this is. Let's put it in its proper place. Any other kind of key takeaways before we get to the podium stuff? Because we had 4 guys at the podium.
I think, outside of the Asante Samuel Jr., I mean, it's good from his standpoint, getting off on that right foot. He started OTAs with a very impressive practice. They take a little bit of a break. They come back to continue OTAs this week, basically picks up right where he left off. And you have to think, for a guy who's now going into a contract year, who's essentially the veteran of this cornerback group in terms of familiarity, you have to feel good about it. And Jesse Minter, Steve Klingscale, from what they're going to bring to the table for what they want these defensive backs to do, it's definitely going to be a big storyline to watch by the time that we get to August.
Yeah, I mean, Asante's always been that dude from a production standpoint. It's from tackling and size on the boundary that I think sometimes gets him in trouble. But we will, we'll see. We'll see. We talked about Quentin Johnston a bit. I'm pretty bullish on this wide receiver room. And I think the DJ Chark signing, I tweeted about it a couple days ago, but I'm excited to see what he looks like and what he can do with Justin, because he brings some stuff that this offense just hasn't had. And you pair that with his, familiar face with Josh Palmer, who's also just as if he doesn't exist on this team where no one's talking about him. Ladd McConkey, who is a quarterback's best friend. Quentin Johnston, who's going through his work. Got Darius Davis, Brendan Rice, Cornelius Johnson. I mean, there's a lot of these guys here. I'm excited. I'm excited to see them. And you just hope that, the level of play is risen because of, I think, the heat on the neck of some of these guys looking behind them. Like Ladd McConkey, you can make an argument. Ladd McConkey, Josh Palmer, DJ Chark, all 3 of them, you could make the argument as to why they would be wide receiver 1 on this team. And that might be something that is that challenge for all 3 of them, looking behind them or in front of them to see who's going to win that job, if there even is that job to be had. Quentin Johnston probably should be wide receiver 1 at some point. We'll see if he can turn into that. But that's healthy competition at a position group that I think is important. Jake, before we get to the press conferences, how do you feel about the wide receiver group? Why is no one talking about Josh Palmer? Is it just because he's not a new face?
I think that's partly it. Yes, it's nice from the standpoint, again, when you think about what the Chargers have done when on the first night of the draft on Thursday, there were 4 wide receivers that were on this roster. There's now 12,
47,
58, maybe including all those UDFAs that are now on there. But you go out, you sign DJ Chark in free agency, you draft 3 receivers in McConkey, Rice, and Johnson. You've all of a sudden built up just healthy competition now. And to your point about Josh Palmer, I mean, I think it is. I don't necessarily think it's a surprise that maybe people have overlooked him, to your point, because of there's so many new faces. But I don't think that it should be overlooked, him going into this season, and probably the chip that he's going to have on his shoulder, much like Quentin Johnston, to say, Keenan Allen isn't here anymore. Mike Williams is not here anymore. I mean, he is the veteran of this wide receiver group now. He is the one that, as of now, even though everybody predicts that Ladd McConkey is going to be the favorite target of Justin Herbert, Josh Palmer still has the most rapport out of any wide receiver in that room right now.
By far, yeah.
And I would fully actually believe that he's going to step into that Keenan role on day 1. I know that everybody thinks that Ladd McConkey is going to be the slot machine, and I totally get that, and he's capable of that, and People have made, bold predictions to say over under 55 catches. And hey, I hope that they're right because I'm excited to see what he's going to bring. But Joshua Palmer now essentially penciled in as wide receiver 1 when just a year ago he was essentially wide receiver 3 in these early days of OTAs, and how they're going to mix it with the run game. I don't think you should sleep on Joshua Palmer because, hey, if you ever want to learn from one of the best in the game, Joshua Palmer did that. He was in Keenan Allen's ear from his first season as a rookie in terms of what to do. Dan, you and I watched him for the last few training camps when they would do the ladder drill. When Keenan would do it, it would just be like poetry. When Joshua Palmer did it, it wasn't that far behind.
It was still poetry.
To the untrained eye, it almost looked identical to Keenan Allen. He was the most fluid throughout those ladder drills. So I'm excited for this year from him. I think he knows that there's going to be a big responsibility on what's put in his shoulders for this offense. And to get that opportunity to essentially have a jump in targets and be the vet guy in that room, I'm excited to see what he's going to bring.
Totally. And then Chargers fans got a healthy dose of the podium from OTAs afterwards. We got to hear from Coach Mike Elston. We got to hear from Troy Dye. Got to hear from Bud Dupree. Got to hear from Tuli Tuipulotu. Let's start off with Coach Elston, who I think perked up some ears with some of the quotes and things he was saying. But the one that kind of got me excited, and we've heard a lot about this, the praise of Jesse Minter and how much success he's had in Michigan and why he's so raved for. He, being Coach Elston, said that he sees the field better than any coach he's ever played with or coached with, And from the back end perspective, him starting his career from the secondary side, him being able to make in-game adjustments and to change his defense on the fly, sees it better than anybody else he's coached with. And that's high praise from someone who has been in the league and been in the game for as long as he has been. And it helps. You can't help but be excited about the differences in what this defense can be versus what it was. And there's a lot of similarities philosophically between the previous regime's defensive philosophy and Jesse Minter's, but there's also some very key differences, and something that we have heard in this regime that we just simply have not heard in years past. And Coach Elston talks about this was the way, we've heard players talk about this too, the way in which and the ease in which Jesse Minter and staff teach this philosophy makes it easy for players to understand and execute. And if we're being frank, that has been something that we saw years past has been the exact opposite, where there has been some conflict in what coaches are trying to get players to do and what players are actually executing or not executing. And so Coach Elston had high praise for Jesse Minter.
Dan, it goes into our storyline episode that we recorded earlier this week, and the communication, I think, and the camaraderie, and here you go with just the Michigan pipeline to the Chargers in this circumstance to have Jesse Minter, Mike Elston, and now Dylan Ronnie coaching up the edge group. I mean, there's so much familiarity, and this is just from a defensive coordinator, defensive line, and edge coach, all in the same. And as we talked about the praise for Jesse Minter from Mike Elston and their collective message to say, we don't want the edge guys and the interior guys to work independently. We want this whole thing to be a group of cohesion, communication. This is how we work together. One guy's going to benefit on one play, and it may come from the interior, it may come from the outside, but it doesn't matter. Let's not have that. Let's not have it just be the focus to say the pass rusher's sole responsibility is to get after the quarterback. Let's work this as a unit, and collectively together, we're going to find ways to win all over the place. You had mentioned the comments that Mike Elston had talked about with Jesse Minter in terms of being that type of coach at Michigan in terms of what he was able to draw up. Dan, as we said on the pod earlier this week, Mike Elston had said during National Championship Week that nobody calls defensive plays at the right time like Jesse Minter. And this is coming from a coach that's had 27 years of coaching experience. You have to feel excited about this because we talked about how this interior group looks like as it stands for the roster right now. There's still some question marks. This would still even be a position that I would believe could be targeted by the time that we get to the end of training camp right before week 1 of the season, that you could bolster that a little bit more.
I will say though, Jay, I don't know if you caught this, but in the press conference, he sounded pretty bullish on the interior defensive line, specifically like the interior pass rush. And he name dropped a few names that he feels is pretty ready and can have a big year. And so I know a lot of people like yourself are a little, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but maybe worried or maybe see an opportunity for improvement.
Yes.
He seemed pretty bullish on their potential. And I thought that was interesting because that kind of came a little by surprise to me, if I'm being honest.
I mean, he started off talking very well about Morgan Fox, Poona Ford, and then he moved for the younger guys that really haven't gotten that amount of playing time because Sebastian Joseph Day and Austin Johnson were obviously here in the previous regime, took up a lot of the snap time. But, you know, he was very impressed with just the entire group as it currently stands right now. Named Scott Matlock, Chris Hinton, Gerard Clark. He said that they're all developing and doing a great job. Talked about CJ Okoye, Tito. He said it was phenomenal. I'm very excited to see what Tito is going to do in this defense when he's back fully healthy. So
Aboigbe, he mentioned as well, mentioned him being more of a run defender and block disruptor, yet to maybe hone in on the pass rush skills, but work in progress. But you forget how many guys they have in the interior. I mean, you named off 7 guys, I think.
Yeah, it's not just from the standpoint of how many guys you have, but it's here we go with this competition word again, because
totally, yeah,
behind Morgan Fox, behind Poona Ford, there's a lot of potential that's there. And so who's going to ultimately beat out for some of those roster spots when you get to those late days in August? And I'm very intrigued with, God, I would love to see a jump from Gerard Clark this year just because his body type fits to me exactly what you would want from this type of a defense in terms of what you want to do. Michael Mason, who's an undrafted free agent out of the same college as Gerard Clark. I'm like I mentioned Tito a second ago. I'm so excited to see what he's going to do with this defensive line because we know how good he can be against the run. What if he can develop a couple other traits as we go forward as well and improve himself in that circumstance? So it's interesting. You love to hear it. It's nice to hear Mike Elston, even at this point of the year, talking about the defensive line like this, but it's going to be in its entirety with this edge group, with this defensive philosophy in general, that they're going to win.
Yeah, you said defensive philosophy. He was asked about that, and Elston was saying that kind of the key pillars of the defensive line are versatility, technique, and block destruction. So when you think of this defensive line and who may make the team and who's going to be starting, all that kind of stuff, think about those 3 pillars. Which ones can be versatile, which ones can be blocking destruction, and which ones can show technique. Jake, I think I lost you. Is your camera off? Oh, now your volume is off. Your volume is off now.
I just saw my notification pop up. Your battery is going to die in 2 minutes. I'm like, oh shit! So I reached underneath the desk real quick and grabbed the charger. Sorry.
Oh, we're gonna keep this in here. I love it.
Oh god.
Block destruction, technique, and versatility, and pillars of this team, defensive line. You mentioned they're all connected. They should be. That's interior plus the edge group, and I'll leave it with this, and probably the part that Coach Elston spoke that probably resonated the most with me was he spoke about Jesse Minter and about Jim Harbaugh and how easy the decision was for him to come here because of those 2 guys, because simply they are the best at what they do. And he believes, and a lot of people on the staff, probably every one of them, and a lot of people outside the staff believe Jesse Minter is the best defensive mind there is, at least that they could have gotten. And Jim Harbaugh is the best head coach. And that's why players, roster, staff, fans are choosing to go to LA. That's like free agents are choosing to go to LA, at least part of it. A lot of excitement and storylines that came from Coach Elston, but he was not the only one, Jake, that spoke at the podium. We mentioned the linebacker slash edge group was also going. Bud Dupree, Thule, and Troy Dye. What were some of your main takeaways from the trio?
I think when it came to Thule, he's like the most humble dude that's out there.
He's such a dude. He's just such a cool dude. He's just like a normal guy.
I think it's just, you think about this, how many edge guys early in their career have had an opportunity to learn and be in part of a group with the likes of a Joey Bosa or a Khalil Mack and now a Bud Dupree. And we've talked about Thule's impact on this team numerous times, stemming all the way back to last year. I personally think that he is the future as it relates to your edge group. He's only going to get that much better. But to get the opportunity to learn from players like this when the Chargers edge group has never been this deep before, and then to hear him talk about, how he's trying to build up on even the things that he did well, how he's trying to perfect it in terms of his pass rush and getting better against the run. He's just the consummate team player. But when it's Sunday and it's game time, he doesn't mess around. He's ready to go.
Yeah, he's such a fun player to root for too. And you mentioned his humility and humbleness. Like he's saying that he's kind of working on his get off and his pass rush and his hands, and he thinks his get off wasn't great last year. And he knows anyone who looks at football can watch and see what he needs to work on. And was saying that he left so much meat on the bone. I'm paraphrasing, but so many plays out there that he could have finished that he ended up not doing last year. And so he's got a lot of stuff that he's working on. And so I think you hope to see that second year bump. And I think you can't help but expect it with a player like him, especially when you look at the group around him. Bud Dupree, he mentioned Bud Dupree specifically as bringing some of that vocal excitement and I don't want to say chirpiness, the wrong
energy.
word, but yeah, he's more vocal than the other guys there on the roster, at least for the edge group. And so him kind of getting that instant feedback vocally and excitement if he or one of the other younger guys are doing a right move or doing a good spin, whatever. It sounds like he is appreciative of that, because otherwise I think it's pretty fair. It seems like Thule, Mack, and Bosa are all pretty quiet guys by nature. Like when you hear Mack speak, everyone listens, but that's because he doesn't speak very often. And Joey's kind of the same way. Thule's kind of the same way. So it's good to have that balance with Bud Dupree, who's the player that kind of just does a lot of the dirty work. And I think he's renowned for doing the things that a lot of people don't like to do, but does them very well. And he's an effort guy and is kind of a glue guy to a lot of rosters. And then Troy Dye, who has been raising some eyebrows this offseason so far. You heard him being referenced by Jesse Minter when Jesse Minter was mic'd up about this Troy Dye kid could play, man, and talked about, I think, his length and his athleticism. And we all know what he can do as a special teamer. And I think Troy Dye is actually getting some first team reps with Junior Colson not out there right now. So don't be too surprised if you see his name out there, maybe more than you thought you would have going into the season. Anything else from the trio?
You mentioned Troy Dye being mentioned, that mic'd up. Thule was also mentioned as well from Minter. He went right over to Harbaugh saying, hey, he's the first one out of the chute over there. This edge group, Dan, is it's interesting, the timing on this, because PFF just came out with a piece. I want to say it was either yesterday or Tuesday, and they basically marked each team's greatest strength and their greatest weakness. And for the Chargers, they actually listed the edge group as their greatest strength. And here we go again, talking about how deep this edge group is all of a sudden in a span of a year. And yes, you have some things to overcome in terms of age, that forbidden word that we don't talk about in this show, of course, and just with some, expectations that in some respects necessarily haven't been met. Dan and I went into this in detail, that when it came to the Chargers edge rushers for last year, even with the amount of sacks that Khalil Mack had last year, not one edge player landed on the top 20 in terms of pass rush win rate for the Chargers. There was not one Charger on that list. The only Charger that actually ended up in terms of a positive note in the top 10 for run blocking win rate was Tully. And that was it. And Chargers were 29th in getting after the quarterback in terms of pass rush win rate. And now you have a room that has Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, Tully coming into his second year, Bud Dupree, who is also a seasoned veteran who had a nice season for the Atlanta Falcons last year. And it's interesting because even Bud had said that he understands the role for what's being expected of him now. He's kind of expecting that straight, third down and long situation, just go get after the quarterback. He can do that. And in some respects, that's kind of how he started his career when he came out of college, that he was a pass rushing specialist on third down. So now again, it's another layer of depth that you have to look at this from not only a talent perspective, but from a roster construction standpoint, that it's a nice tip of the cap, and you're excited to see what this group of four is going to be able to do.
Yeah, last thing I will say, Troy Dye had an interesting and kind of a fun moment when he was asked about his relationship or his time with Justin Herbert back at Oregon, and if he's seen any differences or change in him from then to now. And not only did he say that this is kind of the same dude, and he's a great leader and still as competitive as he's always been, but quite the trash talker, apparently. He was referencing a story of them playing, I think, like 3-on-3 basketball, and that was like the one time where he saw him kind of get out of his own typical calm, cool, collected self. But he said he is quite the author of words, so to speak. So Justin Herbert may surprise you, or may surprise to hear that he is quite the trash talker, which I don't think we've heard many people talk about that.
I'm trying to remember. There's that show that's run on YouTube with the celebrities that will literally sit right across from one another, and their main objective is to get the other one to laugh by just feeding them insults. And I can't remember the name of the show. It's eluding me right now. But Dan, imagine, because before he said that, I didn't know that. I didn't think that that's what Justin Herbert was all about. But now that I heard this, I started envisioning, oh my God, could you imagine a setup with two chairs that are sitting there, and you put Justin Herbert and you put Phillip Rivers in either chair, and just have them throw their type of barbs for what they're known for talking about. And obviously it's Phillip Rivers. There wouldn't be too many expletives, but I like to see what he could come up with.
Yeah. It'd be great. And it's just fun to hear that side of Justin Herbert. Right. And, Troy Day talked about, he's not surprised at all how he has turned into a superstar, talked about the arm talent and all the skills and traits that he had back at Oregon, and saw that immediately kind of translating to the NFL. But the one thing he did notate was the voice and the leadership that he has now here in Los Angeles, and how it's even risen from what it was in Oregon. And that is earned with your play and with how you are on and off the field. And it's cool to see, as we cover this team, like the growth of Justin Herbert as not only a player, during the games in between the 20s or in between the hash marks, but what he's turned into off the field, in the locker room, with the staff, right? Looking at how they construct this team around him, all of that kind of stuff, the impact that he has on this team and the voice he has. Everyone listens to him and they follow his lead. And I think Troy Dye just kind of showcased how it's the same guy. And that's probably one of his best traits, is he stays consistent, and what you're getting with Justin Herbert. And I think as a franchise quarterback, there might not be a trait that's more important than dependability and reliability, that people know what they're getting with you. And with him, it's an elite quarterback, top 5 quarterback in the NFL. And another reason why a lot of these folks have signed with this Los Angeles Chargers team. So some fun nuggets from these takeaways from OTA, both at the podium as well as on the field. Anything else we wanted to highlight on this one? Now, this is an action-packed one, lots of goodies here. Anything else I missed?
It's still May, Dan. We're about to get into the dog days of June. Are we prepared? Are we prepared for it? Are we prepared for it? No, we're not, because you can't remember an off season where you felt like this compelled to talk about Chargers football. I mean, listen to us. We're sitting here talking about a head coach that is keen on everybody wearing, without pads, obviously, but wearing their game uniforms, essentially. There's no shorts that are out there on the field. We're talking about new drills that they're coming out with on the field during OTAs, for crying out loud. We're talking about 11-on-11 drills being instilled in this part of the season right now. And it goes back to these little details that have just been absent from this Chargers team and from this coaching staff for the better part of 2 decades. Yes, there's reason to be excited right now. So even though we're about to take a break here in just a couple weeks when we get into June, and we have to wait until that time in July when training camp really gets underway, there's still plenty to talk about and be excited about.
There is, and we will be here to do all of it. We had our first kind of key storyline episode this week where we talked about defensive line. We have a ton of those in the holster that we will have out for you in the weeks and months to come prior to the start of the season. But until then, you can follow Jake at Jake T. Hefner on X, myself at Dan W. Sports. For Jake, Chargers Unleashed, LA Football Network, thank you so much for tuning in. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll talk to you next time on Chargers Unleashed.